Story 1. Does extraterrestrial intelligence exist? Have extraterrestrials ever visited Earth? How close is the nearest planet with intelligent life? Is faster-than-light travel possible through the distortion of space or by some other means? Story 2. No idea why, but I'm just so interested in finding Genghis Khan's grave. The brutal lengths they went to in order to keep it secret are truly upsetting. Story 3. Where is all the missing art the Nazis looted during World War II? What are the most likely locations of the hundreds of missing works? Story 4. This is probably what happened to Chris Kremers and Liz and Froon. The two women went on a trip to Panama, hiked, and never returned. Later, their bag and a digital camera were found. The pictures start off innocent enough, but as they progress, it becomes clear they were not having a good time. After that, there are many random nighttime photos that they were presumably taking with flash to try to find their way. Rescuers found a foot of one of the women still in a boot and a femur, but no one knows exactly what happened. Some rumors range from cannibalism to death by wild animals. Story 5. The details of the Bronze Age collapse are known only in broad outline. Read 1177 by Eric Klein for details. We have very few specifics, especially about who did what and why. Droughts, famines, revolts, piracy, population movements, and trade collapse all played a role. Mycenae, the Minoans, Troy, the Hittites, the Ugarites, and others were affected. Many cities from Greece to the Levant were burned, and many civilizations collapsed. Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia did not collapse, but they were severely weakened for centuries. Story 6. The Green Children of Woolpit. Were they real or a tall tale? Story 7. What happened to Shelley Miscavige? She went missing, and the Church of Scientology says she is working there, but I do not believe that. The church also has beliefs about Xenu and so-called soul catchers. Story 8. Who the Istal woman really was, what she was doing, and how she ended up dead in such a remote valley near Bergen, Norway, remain unknown. No one has been able to identify her in 50 years. What is especially strange about the case is that she used about 8 different aliases across Europe and was later found burned alive there. Eyewitness reports say she stood out and always seemed to be on high alert. Story 9. Who was behind Cicada 3301, and what was its purpose? It disappeared into thin air. Story 10. The Voynich Manuscript. Story 11. The Mary Celeste was a United States merchant ship found abandoned and adrift in the ocean in the 1800s. I would also like to find out what happened to another ghost ship that was discovered with everyone frozen. Story 12. What happened to the Somerton Man, who he was, and what was he involved in? What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Which version of the Great Filter is true? I guess Stephen King left a more indelible mark on Roanoke than the colonists. Despite speculation, the evidence seems clear to me. Fiction paints a more interesting picture. Story 13. D.B. Cooper was the hijacker who jumped from a jet plane with a large sum of money. What happened afterward? Story 14. I would like to know about the many thousands of years of undocumented human history. Story 15. Where are the missing Sodder children? What happened at Dyatlov Pass? Does the ivory-billed woodpecker still exist? Story 16. I would use the money to find the location of the lost 1715 Spanish treasure fleet, or to search for the Holy Grail if it ever existed. Story 17. It is not actually a rumor or mystery, but I would like to learn the history behind the legend of Excalibur. Story 18. If the Library of Alexandria had survived, would it have advanced civilization as much as we speculate? I adore reading about it, and it infuriates me to think how much we probably lost. Story 19. The Kennedy assassination has driven me nuts ever since I learned about it. There are just so many possibilities. Story 20. Where did the Cool S originate, and why did it spread to so many places? Story 21. The death of Marilyn Monroe. Was she killed? Were the Kennedys involved? Was it drugs? I am not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, but it would be interesting to find out the truth. She was definitely gone before her time. Story 22. There are a few for me. Maura Murray. Where did she go and what happened? I think she likely ran into the forest and died of exposure or succumbed to the elements, but her behavior before she disappeared is bizarre. I would like the Long Island serial killer case to be solved and to know their identity. Where are the Sodder children? What happened to them? Edit. I thought of another one. What happened to Asha Degree? Was she lured out of her home or was she coerced? Story 23. Stonehenge. There are many theories about why it was built, but none are conclusive. Even less is known about how those monoliths were moved and erected. Story 24. Did Coca-Cola really introduce and later cancel New Coke just to boost sales of Coca-Cola Classic? Story 25. Where was Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30 when he is not mentioned in the Bible? Story 26. I just need to know why on earth Easter Island even exists. The island was settled with almost no natural resources, yet the people carved those very large stone heads. Why? Story 27. It kills me that I will die without knowing the deep, dark things rich and powerful people, governments, and companies have done. We only hear about what they have been caught doing, and there must be so much more. What about older wealth before there was any insight into these matters? What did the Rockefellers do abroad on private islands before Epstein existed? Also, all the technology that the Gates, Musk, and Bezos groups get to see deep in the research and development departments. Story 28. Was Caligula's appointment of his horse as consul real, or was he just mocking the senators in Rome? On a more serious note, the life of Jesus. If Ptolemy was Alexander's illegitimate half-brother, that would mean Cleopatra was related to Alexander. The Cleopatra in Egypt 300 years later had the same name as Alexander's full sister. Story 29. What really happened in Epstein's cell and who was involved? Hopefully Maxwell will reveal the nasty things that happened. Not literally, though. Story 30. You never said only one. I would probably choose Amelia Earhart. Alternatively, if that is allowed, I would choose exploring the entire ocean, since about 90% of it remains unexplored. I would like a complete diagram of everything inside it. Story 31. I would like to know the scientific advancements and knowledge lost with the Aztecs and other advanced Native American civilizations. A true depiction of their cities would also be incredible. Story 32. What happened to Madeleine McCann? There are many opinions and speculations. Story 33. Honestly, I'd simply like to know the identity of the man who stood up to a column of tanks during the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. Story 34. I want to know more about the British Columbia murders from 2019. 2 teenagers killed 3 people and caused a massive manhunt spanning 3 weeks and 3,000 kilometers before killing themselves. I think I heard they made a confessional tape, but I doubt it will ever be published. What on earth was going on in their minds? Story 35. All of the books ever written and destroyed for controversial thought. Story 36. The identity of the Zodiac Killer or whether the men who escaped Alcatraz actually survived. Story 37. The Max Headroom incident. For sure. I believe there was a thread on Reddit in which a man claimed to know the people behind it, but he was mistaken. Story 38. I would like to read the history of the world volumes that were destroyed in the Library of Alexandria. Edit. Thank you, everyone. My father is responsible for this comment because I asked him for something like this when I was a child. He has been my history teacher throughout my life. Story 39. There was a murder and sexual assault of a young girl near my hometown before I was born. The victim was Christine Jessup. An innocent man, her neighbor guy Paul Morin, was convicted of the crime because he was considered strange and the police fixated on him. He was eventually exonerated, but her killer was never found. This occurred in Ontario, Canada. Story 40. I would like to know which people were allegedly involved with Jeffrey Epstein in sexual offenses against minors. Story 41. What happened to the Yuba County Five? It is also known as the American Dyatlov Pass, by the way. So many strange events occurred that remain completely unsolved. Story 42. No one has mentioned Jack the Ripper. I would like to know who he was and what shaped him, such as whether he had a difficult childhood. Story 43. How to make Damascus steel. I mean the original Damascus steel, which has been lost to history, not modern materials that merely use the name. It would be nice to finally know, rather than assume based on the appearance of modern steel. Story 44. I truly want to know what happened to Amelia Earhart a century ago. What exactly occurred? How did she die? And how close were investigators to finding her remains? Did she die in the crash? Or did she survive and live on an island until she later drowned or died from other causes? How long did she live after the disappearance? Was she rescued and assumed a new identity, despite that seeming unlikely and conspiratorial? What happened to Fred Noonan? Story 45. I would go back and see how exaggerated the religious books of the Abrahamic religions are. I would like to see what religious figures were really like and how people treated them. Story 46. Tokyo Airport, 1956. A man arrived at Tokyo Airport with a strange passport stating he was from the United Kingdom of Taured. He claimed Taured was located on the border of France and Spain, in the area that is now Andorra. The police took him to a nearby hotel to guard him. They stayed outside his room all night, and in the morning he had disappeared. His documents were gone as well. Later they were found in a completely different place. Where did he come from and where did he go? Story 47. The polynomial time versus non-deterministic polynomial time problem. In short, finding a solution could advance humanity by very large margins. Story 48. This is going to be depressing. My dad passed away last Wednesday. I am devastated. We were very close throughout my childhood. We had a falling out a few years ago that was largely my fault. I had not talked to him in a year. The only thing I want to know is this. Did he die thinking I hated him? Did he die hating me? I love him so much. Even though we had our differences, he is still the greatest man I have ever known. I need to know. Did he know that? Story 49. Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 Russian hikers died under uncertain circumstances in 1959, and the case remains unsolved. During the night, something caused them to tear their way out of their tents and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Why did they leave? What caused them to run? Were they afraid for their lives? It is a strange and disturbing mystery, especially because of the many conspiracy theories. Story 50. I would love to know more about the Knights Templar and the Masons. Story 51. Quite a few mysteries. Who killed JonBenet Ramsey? What happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? What really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? What happened to Amelia Earhart? Who ordered the hit on Malcolm X? Who killed Biggie and Tupac? Who is Becky with the good hair? Story 52. Who killed Missy Beavers? It is the strangest case and seems like it should be solvable, but here we are years later with no arrest. My husband and I cannot even agree on whether the person on the video is a man or a woman. Story 53. It is surprising no one has mentioned the Hinterkaifeck murders. Someone murdered an entire family with an axe in a small German town in 1922. Supposedly the maid quit because she kept feeling uneasy in the house. Her replacement arrived just a few hours before the murders. The perpetrator also tended the animals for several days afterward. Story 54. Where is the Ark of the Covenant and what is in it? Alternatively, how do we read the Pictish stones? Story 55. The identities of everyone involved in Jeffrey Epstein's suicide, whether they participated, knew it was happening, or had any ties to it. Story 56. History is written by victors. I would like to know everything that was lost and burned. Story 57. I want to know how Neanderthals, who are now believed to have been more artistic and slightly more intelligent than Homo sapiens, and Denisovans' short and stocky relatives once widespread in Asia, went extinct while Homo sapiens survived. Story 58. Reading this thread is really interesting. Growing up, I got the impression that everything had been solved or was likely solved. Yet there are many mysteries that no one knows the answers to. These kinds of mysteries need to be discussed more. They are fun to think about. Story 59. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. When I was in elementary school, our teacher read us a picture book about it. It ended with the children following the piper over a hill. I remember looking around, horrified, thinking, does no one else find this weird? In the actual German town of Hamelin, the earliest entry regarding the missing children is from 1384 in the town records. It reads, "It has been 100 years since our children left. No one knows what happened. Apparently a hymn referred to it, and there is an inscription on the side of a house in Hamelin." Story 60. Are the rumors and tangential evidence of a rogue Roman legion operating in China true? And were they actually a Roman legion or merely a mercenary company? Story 61. Who put Bella in the witch elm and why? Which mythological creatures might have existed at some point in history or might still exist today? For example, how do we know there are no giant sea monsters in the vast unexplored ocean? I also want to know what happened to JonBenet Ramsey and what occurred at Dyatlov Pass. Story 62. Is what we know as history really true? What are the major historical events that have been erased or hidden from us? Story 63. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack from London during the Industrial Revolution. The Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Story 64. The complete history of Australia, from the first settlement by Indigenous Australians to the arrival of the British in 1770. There is so much time between those 2 points. I would love to know more about it. Story 65. The Lost City of Atlantis. Since I was 5, I have wondered if there was any truth behind it. Story 66. What really caused the Bronze Age collapse? An unknown event or series of events led to the destabilization and downfall of nearly all the major civilizations of the Mediterranean. At least 4 major empires that had each stood for centuries fell within about 50 years. There is almost nothing in the written record and frustratingly scarce archaeological evidence about the cause of this collapse. There are theories, most involving invading peoples driven by drought, climate change, or war, but we do not know the details. One day there are thriving, interconnected civilizations building monuments and advancing mathematics and science. The next there are ruined cities, starving populations, and almost no written records for a century afterward. Story 67. Some mythical creatures, such as the unicorn, might once have been real animals that later went extinct. Alternatively, a rare, one-off mutation could have inspired the myth. This is an equally interesting possibility and could explain the origin of certain stories. It is reasonable to assume that dragon tales were at least partly inspired by people finding dinosaur fossils. If unicorns were real, it is worth considering why we have not found fossils. Perhaps the horn was made of a material that did not survive fossilization. Story 68. A simple murder question that has been bugging me. Did Stephen Avery really kill Teresa Halbach? Story 69. The Sea Peoples were a mysterious group who caused the downfall of dozens of cities around the Mediterranean over roughly 50 years, including Egypt at the height of its power. No one knows who they were or how they were capable of doing it. Story 70. The Princes in the Tower. I have heard arguments that their uncle, Richard III, had them murdered. At the other end of the spectrum, some suspect Henry VII and his mother, Margaret Beaufort. Henry VII revoked the Titulus Regius, which had declared the princes illegitimate. Henry VII and his mother were careful and crafty. If there had been a snowball's chance in hell that either boy was alive, they would have acted differently. Richard probably killed them, but it would be nice to know for certain. Story 71. The Man from Taurid. The Bermuda Triangle. What is in the Vatican vaults? All the books from the Library of Alexandria. What happened to Amelia Earhart? Atlantis. Story 72. I want to understand Bill Cosby's inner thoughts. Why did he choose the life he did, and why did he assault women? How did he live with himself? Tom Cruise also intrigues me for different reasons. I want to know whether he is genuinely manipulative or simply a driven achiever who reached success through hard work. Either way, I am curious what makes him tick, because he seems unrelatable and inscrutable to me. The Psychology in Seattle podcast offers insight into Cosby's possible inner landscape and mindset, but it is speculative. I want to know what his childhood was like. Why did he choose to become a comedian and present himself as a parental figure and role model? Why was he so conservative, and what was his inner narrative about himself? My guess is that he may have been unable to face some painful truth. Something about women and sexuality may have left him feeling powerless, leading him to rationalize abuse by demeaning his victims. Perhaps he convinced himself the feeling was true even without a coherent justification. I do not know whether he consciously hated women. If he did, it might have been buried deep because admitting dislike implies those people have power over you. I wonder whether he would confess to an accepting audience, believing his actions were justified, or whether he never discussed these impulses with anyone. In contrast, Jimmy Savile appears more openly psychopathic, treating people as objects. I read that he wrestled, suffered many broken bones, and that he enjoyed it. He seemed to feel less shame about his actions than Cosby. He cared more about the consequences, such as imprisonment and financial loss, than about moral condemnation. Both men had power and public reputations for philanthropy. They may be sociopathic, but why did they value that lifestyle and public adulation? They could have pursued other forms of cruelty. For example, Ted Bundy committed serial murder. What would attract someone who mutilates and kills to operating a suicide hotline? Story 73. Is Bob Lazar telling the truth? Did he actually work on an unidentified flying object? Story 74. How much about extraterrestrial life is actually known to humankind? Specifically, what is the extent of any clandestine knowledge held by the world's governments about life on other planets? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.